Hello, David Zaritsky for the Bond Experience. Welcome back. I am joined today by a very special guest. This is Steve Rubin, the author of the James Bond Movie Encyclopedia. Steve, welcome to the show.
Nice to be here, David. Thank you for having me.
Oh, this is fantastic. We're actually recording this early on a Friday morning. It's an amazing way to start the day for me to talk to a fellow Bond fan.
Well, me too. I always seem to have a smile on my face when I talk about James Bond because it's so much a part of my life. I've been writing about James Bond since the 70s, and which seems literally like ancient history. I feel like I'm writing about the tomb of Tutankhamun.
Well, I can feel for that because I mean, watched my first Bond film, The Spy Who Loved Me, in the theater in the 70s. I was born in 68, so I'm definitely a product of Roger Moore era, if you will, during the 70s.
Of course.
We could both wax nostalgic about everything, but I have so many questions about this book in particular that you authored, and some of them are not just about the book, because I'm very fascinated with any author about the journey. And so let's come back a little bit and talk about Steve Rubin, because what was this burning need that you had way back when to even start this project?
Well, it goes way back. It goes back to the 70s. I was a graduate of UCLA, history major, journalism, wrote for my college paper, came out of college, started writing my first book, which happened to be on World War II movies. It was called Combat Films, American Realism, 1945 to 1970. I had started interviewing filmmakers because I wanted to write about the film business. I also had started work at Cinefantastic magazine in Chicago. I was one of their West Coast correspondents writing rather lengthy pieces about 50s science fiction films like The Day the Earth Stood Still, War of the Worlds, and Forbidden Planet. But I wasn't reaching that many people. You know, Combat Films, I think we sold 500 copies of the book, and Cinefantastique magazine was an eclectic film magazine, but it wasn't reaching that many people. I was looking around for a subject that would be, let's reach the whole planet, because I wanted to sell a few books. So I decided to write the James Bond films, a behind-the-scenes history, which was my first James Bond book. I went to Albert R. Broccoli. I had finished the Combat Films manuscript. I guess I got him on a good day. We did our interview at his office on the what is now the Sony lot. And he was so impressed with me that he introduced me to Michael Wilson in London. And that summer of 1977, as they had just wrapped The Spy Who Loved Me. In fact, I have fond memories of driving out to Pinewood in a Rolls Royce with Michael and Ken Adam. I felt like I was with the King of England. And we saw the first screening of The Spy Who Loved Me on the lot at Pinewood, which was such a thrill for me. And then I went backpacking that summer. Since I was in Europe, a friend of mine spent about 11 weeks on a backpacking trip across Europe. And I remember being in a car crossing Spain. I had the radio on, and we heard, Carly Simon's theme song. So it was a great summer. And that was the beginning of my experiences with James Bond movies. I finished all my research, did a lot of interviews in London, came back to the United States, finished the book, and I have to totally reveal what a lot of the fans know is that I made a decision to show Cubby interviews I'd done with Richard Maybaum, Peter Hunt, Terrence Young. And he disagreed with a lot of the things they were saying in their interviews. So he suddenly did some pushback. He just didn't want to cooperate anymore. He saw the scope of the book maybe going a little too far for him. I'm not quite sure. He was very hands-on with Bond, as we all know. So I didn't think it was a big deal because I finished my research until I got a threatening letter from MGM saying, or UA saying, no stills. So there I was in, this is 78. I had a finished James Bond book with no photographs, which of course would have been a disaster. So I began an epic mission to find photographs. Now, I went through my book. I pulled out 182 photos I couldn't use, but I had 18 I could because they weren't owned by the studio. So I figured there must be photos that I can get. So I conducted a worldwide search. I went to New York. I went into the Associated Press archives, and they had a bunch of James Bond stills. But on the back, it stamped AP wire photo. And they sold those. So I bought a bunch of Bond stills, and when I put them in the book, I didn't say United Artists, Dan Jack, I said AP, and I got the book published. We had 180 pictures, and I was creative. For instance, for the Moonraker chapter, I went to NASA, and I got some beautiful shots of the space shuttle. For all anybody was concerned about it, it was a Bond still, but I got it from NASA. And the book was kind of a little bit of a hodgepodge, but I was later complimented on not just going the traditional route. And the book came out in 1981 and did very well. And it was published first in England by Talisman, then by Crown Publishers in the US. And then I did an update 2 years later in '83 upon the release of Never Say Never Again and Octopussy. So that came out and did very well again. And then time goes by. I'm starting work in Hollywood. I'm a film publicist. I work for most of the studios. I was continuing to write. And I was approached by Contemporary Books of Chicago. They had had success with a Marilyn Monroe encyclopedia and a Elvis Presley encyclopedia. And they said, would you be interested in doing a James Bond encyclopedia? And I thought it was terrific. The whole concept of writing an encyclopedia is actually a fascinating experience because you can just throw the kitchen sink at the book, everything. The first book, which was a behind-the-scenes history, was narratively laid out in linear form from Dr. No through Octopussy. This gave me an opportunity to explore the backgrounds of all the actors, the behind-the-scenes people, add characters. You know, an encyclopedia is a whole hodgepodge of information. Okay. And it was fun to write. And I think part of the experience of writing often is are you having fun? And by the 90s, computers were obviously part of our lives. And the key to cracking writing an encyclopedia is indeed writing it on a computer. If I had to write this on a manual or an electric typewriter, where if I wanted to add a entry, I'd have to retype the whole book each time. It would have been a nightmare. But with computers, a click, click, and you're in. So I did 3 editions. I did one in 90, 95, and 2003. And then we come to this edition. I've become an old hand at collecting images, and I have to give my publisher credit, Chicago Review Press. They told me categorically, if the still was a publicity still, don't worry about it. So this book has over 400 photographs, and many of them are well, I went around the world this time again. I went to Sweden, I went to France, I went to England, Argentina. Actually, they were sent to me from Argentina, but friends contributed photos from their own archives. So this is the largest collection of Bond photographs I've ever had. Also, I was able to get illustrations from artists like Jeff Marshall and Brian Adams, who gave me these wonderful, evocative interpretations of the Bond movies and the characters.
Yeah, and it's amazing. By the way, you're answering some of the questions that were burning as I was looking at this. For example, I mean, I very rarely see books come out that utilize so much identifiable imagery. And then as I was clicking through, and people who don't own this book, I'll just give you, I always like to talk about the experience. When I first opened it up, even the page hand feel is very nice. It's very slick. It doesn't feel inexpensive. It's a beautiful book. But the color photos in here are amazing. And I kept, as I was turning the pages, Steve, I kept asking myself, how the hell did this guy get permission to use these? Because I've talked to fans and friends who their books have been just, stopped, embargoed because of the imagery.
It's a great challenge. And I think things have changed over the years in both writing and documentary film work. there's a provision in the U.S. copyright law called fair use.
Hmm.
And if you're an historian and you're trying to make a point by using an image, whether it's a still image or a movie image, there's a certain permission factor, because as historians, and I'm not just collecting a bunch of photos and publishing a book of photos, I'm publishing an historical look at the James Bond movies. And I've had, having done this now for, over 40 years, I think, even though I don't have any communication between Michael and Barbara, I think they know about the book. They realize I'm not a hatchet guy ready to do a thing on their series. I'm the ultimate fan. I've loved Bond since I saw my first James Bond movie in 1964. I saw Goldfinger in the theaters. And so I think that we have a nice non-relationship. But I also think part of the key of cracking this book is I have friends all over the world who let me use their archives. If I had to go to United Artists to get an official photo still, it probably would have cost me around $300 per photo, which would have been ruinously, I could never have done that. I aside from the plane fare to get to Sweden to see my friend Anders Freyd, I'm sure you know who he is.
Sure.
And
yeah.
Anders is one of the biggest Bond fans in Europe. He has more images than he can shake a stick at. And then going to London and France, Luc Leclerc, from the French Bond fan club. If I didn't have access to these people, the book wouldn't have been done, because you can't start from scratch here, because you'd have to buy photos. And these guys gave me everything for free. I mean, they were wonderful.
And one of the things you said early on, and you've proven it by talking about Luke and Anders, for example, is this book, even in your opening, says it's really a celebration, which is maybe why, Dan, Jack, and Eon are, have a wonderful non-relationship, as you aptly put, because this truly is a celebration. When I first started, and I've had it for about a week and a half now, as I first started to go into it, I started to read it like a book. And then I realized this is not, so much to read from beginning to end, but a celebration of a moment. And you really call this out, that all of us as Bond fans, there are little visceral behavioral science moments that we have, looking at a particular watch, looking at a scene from a movie that evokes an emotional, release and escape. And so then I started flipping through to my favorite moments and then going, oh, great. And what I loved about this book is some encyclopedias are almost like Wikipedia. It's like, just the facts, ma'am. Your voice is in here. Your celebration, your opinion as a Bond fan is in here. And I really like that. It's a very unique aspect for an encyclopedia.
Thank you. I've always kind of emphasized a colloquial relationship with my reader. I don't want to come off like a college professor. I want to come off like a fan, just like they are, talking about what we love. I've had a lot of fun recently. I've become a big Facebook person. I have a site on my I have the James Bond Movie Encyclopedia site where I do this day in James Bond movie history, where I actually are able to tout some of our favorite people on their birthdays. I mean, just the other day, I was doing Diana Rigg on the anniversary of her birth, the great, wonderful late actress. And then I have to just keep emphasizing the fact that I'm a gosh, wow fan, just like I are. I'm looking forward to No Time to Die, just like everybody else. It's so funny because I keep being asked, what about watching it on TV? And I said, that's sacrilegious. How could you watch a James Bond movie for the first time on television? I echo what I'm sure Barbara and Michael said to Netflix when Netflix offered like this huge sum to be you can't do that. That's, there are a lot of movies that are perfectly fine on the home television screen. Forget about James Bond. You cannot watch it for the first time on a TV screen.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, The Irishman, perfect, fine, long series that you want to see on a TV. I'm with you. I mean, I need the theater going experience for all the reasons I think you might agree with. I need the the nostalgic factor. I need the bigness of it. You know, the feeling that it's an event. You know, when I go over to my couch, it's not an event. It's David, you know, looking like a schlub, putting his feet up and, you know, cracking a beer. When I go out to see a Bond film, even on a fourth or fifth viewing, I probably have had some wonderful dinner. You know, maybe I've had a martini, or maybe I'm having something afterwards. It's usually with a friend or my wife or a loved one or someone I'm introducing Bond. It's an event. It feels like that. Walking into a theater, even the smell of the butter and the popcorn and the grandiose foyer that you walk in. I need all of those trappings. And maybe I'm just a nostalgic fool, but I would miss it. What about you?
Totally. I would have to say that I see, well, of course, no one's been seeing many movies lately, but I'm very, very picky about what I see on the big screen. You know, it's a kind of I think we're all kind of saying to ourselves, it's expensive to go to the movies now. You know, there's a lot of things involved in it. But I think we pick big screen movies, and nothing says big screen bigger than James Bond.
Yeah.
Now, I remember the first James Bond, when I went to see Goldfinger that Christmas of '64. You know, I'm a West LA person. We never went into Hollywood for movies. There were like a million movie theaters in our own neighborhood. But for some reason, it sounded like Goldfinger, the Chinese, let's go. So we went to the Chinese theater in Hollywood, the most famous theater in Los Angeles. Huge crowds. You're sitting in the theater watching Goldfinger. I had just read the book. This was my almost the first time. I think I had read The Great Escape the previous year when I went to see the big Steve McQueen World War II movie. And that was cool. But Goldfinger was just so much fun to see it because I had started to read the books, as everyone in my junior high school class was reading those little colorful Signet paperbacks, which by the way, I feature in this encyclopedia. Yeah. I got permission from Signet to use those covers. And those are very nostalgic for me because, in fact, I just got through reading Goldfinger again. It's the first time I've read it since '64. It was literally falling apart in my hands. The paper was just falling apart, but it was just so much fun. And then seeing Goldfinger on the big screen, my favorite Bond movie, just so you know. And I still remember sitting there while Q is explaining how the Aston Martin works with that with that kind of low key thing and he's just explained the ejector seat, and Bond says, "Ejector seat, you're joking." And Q says,
good.
I never joke about my work, 007. And you know what's funny? That movie is it's 57 years old, which is just startling. It still plays today. I mean, if we went to this big screen, we'd still get those big laughs. And you know, it's it's nostalgic Bond, and it's great.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the Connery films in general, but that one in particular, is kind of like hallowed ground. And it's not just a great Bond film, it's a great film. I mean, it just stands up with, you know, some of the Hitchcock films that, you know, people regard as the greats and the classics. But one that we're not sure if it's going to be a great Bond film or classic is No Time to Die. We haven't seen it. And I was happily surprised to actually see No Time to Die represented in here. I mean, that must have proven some challenge, I would imagine.
Well, it's still a challenge for all of us because you'll have to admit that Eon has kept this plot closer to the vest than they've ever kept a plot. I used every source in the book to reach out to get information. I mean, obviously, I have information based on a lot of the press reports. There's very little plot information. I've heard little bits and pieces. It was challenging, you know, very challenging. I asked people if they'd seen the script. I mean, it was almost a perfect MI6 operation because they've kept this completely under wraps. I don't think anybody knows much more than a few things. There's been a few spoilers, but you know, as I report in the book, we know that James Bond has retired to Jamaica. We assume he's with Madeline Swan because they left as a couple, and she's obviously in this cast. So, but I haven't heard a lot more than that. We know that Felix Leiter comes to the island to ask him to do something in Cuba, and Bond is all of a sudden in Cuba, and he's going to meet Paloma, who's a CIA agent, and I think we know that Lashana Lynch is the new 007, which, by the way, sparked a lot of controversy. As you know, everybody thought that James Bond was being replaced by an African, I don't even think she's American. I mean, she's a woman from Africa named 007. But that was just the number. I mean, James Bond is still James Bond, and there is no new James Bond. We still have our old 007, our James Bond with a person with a new moniker. They just reassigned the number, which sounds like a logical thing. Unlike the New York Yankees, they don't retire numbers after an agent leaves the Secret Service.
That's true. That's true. And I mean, as you're researching this type of thing and thinking of that as an update, you mentioned as a fan, you still get excited about a new movie coming out, but you've seen literally since Goldfinger, I don't know if I could call it the evolution, but certainly the transformation of some of the films. So as a fan, as an author, do you walk into No Time to Die concerned? Are you hoping for certain tropes to show up? What goes through your mind?
Well, the Daniel Craigs have been a little bit of a rocky road. I think that, first of all, I'm a huge Daniel Craig fan. I think we all walked into Casino Royale a little bit concerned about this quote unquote blonde Bond. You know, he didn't have much reputation at that. But I think my jaw dropped after that opening chase scene. Yeah. And I think my jaw stayed pretty much open throughout Casino Royale. And I mean, that movie, Casino Royale, did more for broadening the reach of the James Bond series than movies done in a long time. And I haven't liked all of the Craigs. I thought that Quantum of Solace was a drop down, although obviously it has its fans. I thought Skyfall was terrific, one of my favorite Bond movies, and yet I didn't particularly care for Spectre on recent viewings. It just came up short. But I will say this about all the Daniel Craigs. He's always terrific. And since he's in every scene, you can't completely disparage all the films because he carries them. Now, with this latest one, I think they've pulled out all the stops. I think they've got a whole new team, and they've done things they haven't done for a while. They've added new, I think, some new influences. Certainly, Cary Fukunaga, the director, is going to bring something different to the series. They brought in Phoebe Waller-Bridge to brighten up the dialogue, and I think we're looking forward to what that's going to look like. It's not going to look like a typical Bond movie. I think that certainly Rami Malek is going to be a delicious villain. He does everything so wonderfully. This is going to be a great movie. I'm predicting that it'll follow the first and third movies. So I think we're in store for a real treat.
I happen to agree. I mean, I think, to me, from what I've seen, even, you know, in the public eye right now, it looks like they've injected back in fun, you know, when you used to have fun and not just kind of the seriousness of the Craig era that he's associated with, but and funny. You know, I think there's going to be some funny moments, which it's always good to have tense, suspenseful moments in a Bond film, but it's also nice to have a little bit of a valve open up and a little bit of relief and sometimes comedy relief when appropriately applied, you know, not to the campy cheesiness level, is just wonderful. I mean, I enjoy those, and probably also, dare I say, probably something we all need right now. It's been a very serious time for people all around the world, and we need a little bit of fun injected in our lives.
You are preaching to the converted here, because I think that one of the things that has disappeared for the most part from cinema is that word. Because the other day I was talking to somebody, they asked me for a quote on the 40th anniversary of Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I told them that when I first saw the movie, incidentally also at the Chinese, I had so much fun seeing that movie that I stayed for a second showing. I've never done that in my life, where I literally sat in my seat. I don't know what they were doing in those days, but they didn't clear out the theater, and I was able to stay there. And I watched the movie a second time. And I think that we're all looking for fun movies. I think that part of the reason everybody's looking forward to the Bond movie is they sense that it's going to be fun. And I'm thrilled that there is a little bit of a lightness to some of the situations, because the Daniel Craigs have been very serious. There's been very little humor. They've stayed away from it. And I think that part of the thing that's changed with the James Bond world is that James Bond no longer has the spy genre to itself. You know, you have the Bourne movies, you've got Mission Impossible, you even, on a lighter thing, you have those those, was it Guardsmen, the
Kingsman.
Kingsman
Yeah,
movies, because they're spy adventures. And then, of
yeah.
course, even though they're not spy adventures, in terms of stunts, you have to compete with all of the Fast and the Furious movies, because they do things with cars that are crazy. And Bond was Bond was always the best place to get a car chase. So it's tougher now to be unique, and you have to really give the Bond series credit for staying vital all these years, because there's been a lot more competition.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's just so much material, that Bond, the nice thing is during this time, it's been 5+ years hiatus in between films. My gosh, there's so much content and so many films to go back to. And it kind of leads me to another question I had for you, to pick your brain on this, because this is an encyclopedia, but one of the things I really loved about it's been sitting on my desk since it arrived, by the way. Wonderful handwritten inscription. Love it. But one of the things that I like is it's not like lifting weights. I mean, there are some books out there, wonderful in and of themselves, but they are very weighty. So you had to make choices and decisions. I mean, I'm sure there's more material from Steve Rubin that didn't go in the book. So how did you decide what made it in versus on the cutting room floor?
Well, it's a very good question. The book I had done previously to this book for Chicago Review Press was the Twilight Zone Encyclopedia, which was a book all about the first 5 seasons of the series back in the 50s and early 60s. And I worked very closely with the editor on, because I as people know who've collected my previous encyclopedias, I went nuts with just going after all sorts of arcane trivia. I mean, signposts, and really little bitty bits of trivia. And they told me that, first of all, they limited my word count, by the way. I had to limit my word count. I think it was 250,000 words. And I think that I had to prune certain things out of the book, and it was not easy. A lot of that arcane trivia, little things like bits of dialogue and signposts and just the stuff that I'd poured into the other editions, they really told me to get rid of. But this book gave me an opportunity to expand a lot of the biographical. They were very keen on me having as much biographical information in this book. And those who've collected the previous encyclopedias will note that the book is almost entirely rewritten. I rewrote almost every entry to incorporate new information, a little bit more background on where these actors had been either prior to Bond or after Bond, and also a lot more information on if they had worked with Bond players in other facets. So it gives you a good idea of the perspective of working on the Bond movie. And so I had to keep it down. It was a long process to get this Bond. It's so funny that the editors say that your books are the toughest books to work on, because not only do they have to deal with all the editorial information, and they check every fact, by the way. If they see something I wrote and it isn't working in the Google universe, they'll come back to me about this. And they ask me a lot of questions. But incorporating the photos into the design of the book is not easy. I mean, some cinema books have a few photos. I literally have photos on every page, and it just goes on and on. So it was a challenge to get. I think I kept everything critical. There may be a few things that got left out, but I'm very proud of the book. It's so funny you mentioned size-wise. The previous Bond encyclopedias were really coffee table books that weighed a lot. This is not a light book. It's still heavy, but it's a smaller, compact edition. Doesn't quite fit into your pocket, but it's smaller.
Well, but you could. So, I mean, everybody could see it kind of compared to my giant head, but you could easily take this on a plane and a backpack to the beach. Whereas, like you're saying, many encyclopedias, just in general, when you think of encyclopedia, you think, I need a forklift in many cases.
Right.
This is, again, it's been traveling with me. It's been on my desk. I had it here. I moved it over. I took my microphone. It wasn't like, some of these, which really, it makes it almost like a companion. and less about a volume to be intimidated. And that's one of the things I didn't find. There were two aspects I walked away with, and I like to talk about this from a thematic standpoint. I found this very approachable because I could hear a fan voice, and it was almost like you and I were at a pub, and you were just filled with knowledge. And I would say to you, what about the jump, from Tomorrow Never Dies? And you would say, well, and I hear that voice in here. The other thing is, like I was talking about, the approachability of this not feeling overwhelming. It's very intuitive, the way I was able to search on things. I had a call earlier in the week and I wanted to look something up. It's right there. So I find that this is not something I'm honestly going to put on my shelf. It's going to be kind of within arm's reach because I do these types of things. And I think there's a huge advantage to that. Was that purposely done in kind of keeping it that way, very approachable?
I think the word is accessible. I think that it's just designed, to, I don't expect anybody to read this cover to cover because it's not designed that way. You pick it up and you want to look at something, and it's so funny. I keep coming back to the photographs because the photographs are very key to an encyclopedia, because what are we talking about? We're talking about probably the most visual movie series in the history of man and woman. And it's basically you got to settle on those photos. I never had too many photos of Claudine Auger, my favorite Bond girl, because, you could just stare at her for years. And, all the women are very nicely represented. And I try not to think of myself as being sexist because, there are a lot of beautiful women in various stages of undress in the book, but it's done tastefully. It is a family book, as is the Bond series. And I get asked a lot by press people, how do you explain the success of the Bond movies over the years? And I always emphasize that they're family movies, which is not something you say about a lot of movie series, because other movies have nudity, they've got the F-bomb. The Bond producers over the years have maintained a fairly tight leash on what the movies can present to the audience. Yeah. You're comfortable taking your grandmother, you're comfortable taking your 8-year-old, because there's nothing they're going to see that's going to just scare the living daylights out of them or offend them. And, they crossed the line a little bit with License to Kill. I thought it was a terribly violent Bond movie with not a lot of the saving graces we've had, certainly not any of the lightness we love. But I think that's another thing that has made this such a successful series. It's for everybody.
That's a really, really important point. I love that. There are things in this encyclopedia that people are going to notice right away. So I think it's important to talk about, and that is when you talk about the movies themselves. And I noticed that you provide your own ranking, not so much ranking, but 1 star, 2 stars, 5 stars, etc. Talk to me about that process, because this is very much of like, hey, I'm a fan doing this. I give this one 5 stars because I love it. This one, it's 2.5.
Yeah, well, it's early on. I realized that whereas in my first book, the behind the scenes history, it was purely an historical editorial piece. A historical piece without the editorial. I didn't include any reviews. But if you're going to have an entry on The Spy Who Loved Me, you've got to tell the fans what you think of the movie, because you're going to have opinions on that. Okay. And I think it was important for me to, I'm not a formal critic. I don't really consider myself a guy who's going to review everything. But I certainly, having been involved with Bond writing for all these years, I have my opinions. I have very strong opinions, and I had to bring those to the table. I didn't want to go crazy. I know there are some critics on the internet who really take it a little too far about how they don't like certain things. The one thing I will say about every single James Bond movie is there are things to love. I think you never go. There's not one Bond movie you can completely write off and say that this is a mess. Don't even watch this movie. One of my least favorite movies is A View to a Kill, The Last Roger Moore. It just went off the rails in a lot of ways. But it has that great John Barry music. It has Christopher Walken chewing the scenery every 2 minutes. There's a lot of globe trotting. There's a lot of things to see. Visually, it's stunning. I didn't like the movie that much. I mean, I think James Bond should not be chasing anybody on a fire truck. It seems like something out of the Keystone Cops and the Max Sennett days. But it's fun. It's fun. Another movie I don't give high marks to is Quantum of Solace, because I didn't like the locations. I thought that they were lackluster. The ending in that building somewhere out in the Bolivian desert, just to me, was kind of bland. But that's just nitpicking a little bit. I mean, we all, since all of us have seen pretty much all the movies by now, we're all kind of critics in our way. We know what to expect, which puts a lot of pressure, by the way, on the producers. They've got to deliver a movie that has to appeal to their core. And I don't think there are producers in our business that know their audience better than Michael Wilson and Barbara Broccoli. They really know what to deliver. And that's why I say I think No Time to Die is going to just pull out all the stops.
I agree. And I've got to ask, I want to get the dates right. So you've had some form or iteration of this book that I'm holding right here since, pretty much 1980. I mean, that's when the research and the discussions kind of all started. What has been some of the, I would imagine, incredible reaction by the people that read this, by the fans? I mean, you've got to have some interesting stories, I would imagine.
Just, it's funny. People just seem to love my work. They really do. They see what you've said, that I'm a fan talking about things that I love. And the reviews have been pretty categorically great. I mean, occasionally somebody complains, how come there's not an index? I don't have an index in there. I said, guys, it's an encyclopedia. I already have an A to Z thing there. Give me a little break here. But I think that what's really fun for me is doing signings, because I look in the faces of the people who are buying the book, and these are just fans who just love Bond. And being able to write my name in a book that I know that's going to be on their shelf for as long as they live is very exciting. One thing I've discovered is the Bond books I've done in the past don't generally end up in the bargain bin at Barnes and Noble. They stay in print, and the people hold on to them, and they're hard to get on Amazon these days. But I have so much fun with the fans. We've also done some fun things over the years. We've conducted some trivia tournaments. Last year, when we thought we were going to get the Bond movie about this time, or at least in the fall, we did our first international trivia tournament where we did it on Zoom. I collect 5 or 6 of my friends, and we ask the questions, and then the contestants all appear on Zoom and answer them. And it was a little bit of a stumbling with all the technical sides of it, but we had so much fun. It was like a 3.5-hour Zoom. And the final answer, and I can't remember what it was a good one, a good final between the two guys who were going back and forth in overtime, almost like an NBA basketball game. And it was a lot of fun.
That's amazing. Yeah, I'm a part of that fan groupie moment in this. There was just so many great things. So it brings us to probably the last question, which is, all right, what's in the future? What's the future have in store for Steve Rubin at this point then, with the book and even outside of the book?
Well, I'm doing a number of things. I'm actually kind of slowly going out there. I'm developing a new moniker, the Classic Film Whisperer, because I feel that my strength as a writer and a researcher, and just understanding the importance of classic films, not only Bond but all genres, is important. As I mentioned, I do these Facebook positions, not only the James Bond Encyclopedia, but I have a Facebook page called Steve Rubin Saturday Night at the Movies, where I review classic films. And I'd love to be a curator for one of the studio libraries and do for them what Turner Classic Movies does when they have a Ben Mankiewicz come on and introduce a movie and tell you something about it. I'd like to do more of that hosting work. That's a goal. But I'm also a working screenwriter. And producer. I've actually produced 5 films starting back in 2002. I've started to get some movies made, and I'm writing a lot of comedy right now. I think that, just like we talked about, that it's lightness that we need to bring back into the marketplace. My writing partner, Billy Reback, who was one of the original writer-producers on the Tim Allen series Home Improvement and wrote for a lot of the Disney Channel shows, we've teamed up and we've been writing for about 5 years, cranking out series pilots and feature specs just to see if we can get into that marketplace. Very challenging, like everything in life, but we're making progress. I think in the back of my mind, and I'm sure the fans will appreciate this, I would love to write a James Bond movie. I mean, that would be the ultimate thrill. I don't think I have a chance in hell of doing it right now. I'm still kind of the, I think the phrase is enfant terrible to the Broccolis. I'm still the maverick guy on the outside. I don't think Barbara's going to be calling me anytime soon, but maybe sometime in the future. I'm still relatively young. I've got a lot of love of this series. You never know.
I have to ask, do you have a Bond film somewhere up in your head right now, just kind of stewing?
No, I don't. I think what's stewing up there is just the anticipation factor for seeing No Time to Die.
I know.
But over the years, I've met people who have written, their version of a Bond movie. I think that I have to say that it's probably one of the great challenges in cinema, trying to come up with a fresh story. And I think that there's so many things that go into trying to put together the story. At one point, I thought that it would be fun to take James Bond back to his beginning and see how he got it. But they kind of did that. They did that with Casino Royale. That was kind of rebooting the series with Daniel getting his first 2 kills. And I think that they've kind of done that. What's interesting, and when you look back on the history, the books were written in the 50s, when the world was very different then. And I think that it would be fun to see James Bond in the 50s. I would enjoy that, but I think the young audience would not. I think I always seem to wax towards nostalgia and history, but today's contemporary youth audience wants to see movies set in now. And that's why I think the Bond movies have focused as of late more on international terrorism as the threat to the planet. I think that, the revival of Spectre and these stories, kind of almost torn from the headlines, have made Bond very real. And probably more so than at any time in the series, maybe going back to From Russia Love and Dr. No. I mean, these Bond movies, as fantastical as they can get, are still anchored in the reality of our world.
Yeah, what do they say? Bond film is always 5 minutes in the past and 5 minutes in the future, something like that.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
It's got that. And, speaking of the future, we will be looking with great anticipation at everything that you do. In the meantime, we're going to be putting the links down below for all your social media, and also obviously so people are very jealous of my book right now, they can stop being jealous and get their own book. But Steve, thank you so much for coming on today. This has been such a pleasure.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, David. It's just so much fun to be with a like-minded fan like myself.
It is, and that's all we are, is just fans doing incredible things in this wonderful community.
By the way, I don't know if you noticed this, because it looks like I'm just wearing a plain white T-shirt, but actually I am wearing my Goldfinger T-shirt.
Very nice.
There you go.
Ah, love it. That's a nice bit of promotional kit. Love it. Oh, talk about nostalgia. What a great way to end. My gosh. Well, Steve, thank you so much. And this has been, of course, David Zaritsky for the Bond Experience. And we'll see you all very soon. Take care, everyone. Thanks for watching this episode. If you want to be up on the latest from the Bond Experience, just click on this subscribe and subscribe to our channel. You're going to get all the latest and greatest information, plus some exclusive content. And by the way, speaking of content, here's something especially for you, just because we know you. Talk to you soon.